Have you ever asked yourself, when did our ancient patriarchs actually live? If we can narrow down the time that they lived in, surely we can identify the historical figures that also are associated with them. What are the historical synchronisms for the Bible? Can we actually see events from Genesis and Exodus play out? I believe so, and today we're going to talk about a few of those. So let's explore some of the history, the context, and the scriptures so we could get a better idea of this. My name is Jonathan. Welcome to the Haystack. It's harvest time. If this content helps you in any way, please consider liking and subscribing and sharing with your friends. Please comment. I'd love to hear back from you, and please enjoy. Today, I'd like to start with a historical synchronism found in Genesis chapter 14. In this chapter, Lot is captured in the battles of the kings. He's rescued by Abram. Melchizedek administers bread and wine and blesses Abram. So here we understand that this is a time period in which Melchizedek and Abram both live. In the first verse, it states, "And it came to pass in the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar." Shinar is commonly understood as the region of Sumer. Shinar is the region of Sumer, or Babylon. So we do have a king's list for Sumer. So can we find who Amraphel is? To help with that question, we have a clip from Dr. David A. Falk, a biblical Egyptologist, to help explain some of this.
Now, in Hebrew, Amraphel begins with an aleph, has an M or mem, has an R or resh, a P or pei, and ends with an L or lamed. Now, in Semitic languages, the last letter often changes for a variety of reasons. So we can sort of forego trying to match that last character because it often changes. So that's nothing unusual in Semitic languages. If we can get a match, though, on the first four letters, then we've got a match. Now, there is one king in the Babylonian kings list that happens to match all four letters, which is King Hammurabi of the first dynasty of Babylon. In Babylonian, his name is Amraphel. It starts with a guttural, has an M, an R, and a P. It is a perfect match.
Concerning that last letter L in Amraphel, this was actually added on in a Semitic population to emphasize that Hammurabi, or Hammurabi El as Lord, he was Lord Hammurabi. So if I understand that correctly, I've heard others suggest that this is why, and it was a custom because Hammurabi was nearly deified by the population. Though with this historical synchronism, many are resistant towards this because it is a paradigm shift. It contradicts a literal interpretation of the ages and numbers given in the Bible, which most have calculated to place Abraham to live around the time of 2000 BC. However, we have far more synchronisms that push Abraham actually around the 18th century BC. Another misconception people have with Abraham is he being from Ur of the Chaldees, and they mistake Ur of the Chaldees for the Ur of Babylon. However, it is more likely that he is of Ur-Kasdim or Urkesh, which is a more northern area, and he would not have actually been traveling all the way far back into the Tigris and Euphrates area, where Hammurabi was. In fact, the Chaldees didn't even exist at the time of Abraham. They came about hundreds of years later, and they came about in the location of Urkesh, that geographical location where he was more likely than not originally from. However, regardless of evidence, there are denominational lines and a belief in sola scriptura, where the scripture is the last authority, or the final say. And so, no matter what evidence comes forth, if it contradicts the literal interpretation taken by some denominations, it will inevitably be rejected unless they come to terms with existing evidences. Now, I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and one of the biggest criticisms we get is about the Book of Abraham. And so you would think that if Joseph Smith had made up a bunch of locations and additional story for the Book of Abraham, then it would not show up as evidence today. However, here we have David Snell, who will share with us additional evidences that support what scholars are saying today and the Book of Abraham.
While most scholars in the past and today believe Abraham's was located at a site in what is today southern Iraq, a good case has been made by some scholars for locating it in what is today southern Turkey or northern Syria. While the exact site of Abraham's is still unknown, a number of plausible candidates have been proposed in the general area near the Turkish-Syrian border. Archaeological discoveries confirm that during Abraham's day there was a discernible measure of Egyptian culture, trade, and possibly even military presence in Syria-Palestine. Furthermore, Egyptologists recognize that the ancient Egyptians during Abraham's day did in fact practice human sacrifice, or more properly, sanctioned killing or ritual violence against enemies of Egypt or rebels against the king. Even the names of gods mentioned in the Book of Abraham appear to have external confirmation. The god Elkanah, for example, is very likely a shortened form of the Canaanite deity name El Konei Haaretz, or God who created the earth. This god was worshipped as El-Kunir Shah by the ancient Hittites living in Anatolia. There is also evidence that the other gods mentioned in the text, Libna, Mamakra, Korash, and Pharaoh, were anciently worshipped in this same area. Finally, the name Olishem, mentioned in the Book of Abraham, has been plausibly identified with a location called Ulisum or Ulishum, mentioned in an inscription of an ancient Akkadian king named Naram-Sin. This Ulusum is believed to be located somewhere in southern Turkey not far from the Syrian border, precisely the same location where some scholars believe that Abraham lived.
Now, here David is actually suggesting a time period between 2000 BC to 1800 BC, whereas I'm suggesting about 1800 BC to 1700 BC. Now, what he's identifying here is more the time of the period of Terah, the father of Abraham, and Abraham in his youth. Now, that would actually match up very well with our time period, especially with the historical synchronisms in Terah being Teru of Urkesh.
Now, it's a very, very interesting, the parallels between the biblical Terah and Teru of Urkesh. First of all, Teru of Urkesh has to flee Urkesh and become a sojourner. So he leaves. And we know from the letter of Mari letters that one of his sons dies at Urkesh.
And one of Abraham's brothers dies.
Yes. And we have a very interesting letter from Terah of Urkesh where he talks to the king of Mari, and he goes, I've lost control of the city here. Now I am a Hapiru.
So does the written cuneiform of Teru transliterate into the Hebrew Terah?
It does fit this pattern. What you have in cuneiform is biliterals. Now, when you do read cuneiform, you'd see a TE followed by glottal character and the I, and then probably another I added between that, and then ear, and then the ru. So there'd be many, many syllables that go into this, and then you just say this would be teru. So you would probably not pronounce that second ear that's in that sequence of cuneiform. So you just say teru. Hebrew abhors a word or name ending in a vowel. This is why in a lot of Hebrew names, it usually ends with a consonant, because the way that pronouns work in Hebrew is often through the addition of vowel sound at the end of a word. So teru would have to end with a consonant at the end for it to be properly transliterated into Hebrew. So in this case, they used a hate.
Christopher Eames was the first to make this connection between Teru of Urkesh and Terah, the father of Abraham. One thing he has stated is, based on the correspondence, Teru is generally assumed to be some sort of kingly figure. However, he is never referred to with the typical title king of the time. In third-party correspondence, he is referred to simply as the man of Urkesh. In his own letters to Zimri Lim, he refers to himself as your servant. This prominent, yet not necessarily kingly position may be hinted at in the biblical account of Terah in Genesis 11, 26 through 32 and Joshua 24, verse 2. But how do we know that Teru just simply isn't a common name? What parallels do they have in their lives? Well, reading further on Armstrong Institute of Biblical Archaeology, it says, to this point, more than that, they actually indicate a general public hatred for him, referring to Teru of Urkesh. His letters to Zimri Lim revealed that the Hurrian population did not accept him. and the correspondents speak of hostility and resentment towards him. Quote, "Because I have cast my lot with my lord, people in my town hate me. A couple of times I have had to save myself, escaping death." This comes from one of his letters. Going on, quote, "They do not speak with me," close quote. Teru lamented Zimri-Lim in the Mari correspondence. Quote, "They speak evil things," close quote. One of Zimri-Lim's replies follow, quote, "I did not know that the sons of your city hate you on my account. But you are mine, even if the city of Urkesh is not," close quote. One thing we know for certain about Teru of Urkesh is he was devoted to the king of Mari. This has led to speculation that maybe he was an appointed person in that region for that town, an appointed leader, and not truly a leader of those Hurrian group. Possibly this is why he was rejected. It's because he was more dedicated to his lord, or the king of Mari, Zimri-Lim, and used essentially as a gun for hire for political means in this tumultuous time in Mesopotamia, serving whatever gods of those countries, possibly not even his own gods. And he was hated, and he had a son who died. He's also associated with someone whose name is very similar to Haran, the son of Terah. This name is Haziran. It doesn't say whether Haziran is the son of Teru of Urkesh, only that they are closely associated and he was a young ruler coming up after him. Although Teru was also the last known ruler on our king's list. So, is that the same? What does the Bible and the book of Abraham say? In chapter 11 of Genesis, verse 28, it says, "And Haran died before his father Terah in the land of his nativity in Ur of the Chaldees." In Abraham chapter 2, verse 1, it says, "Now the Lord God caused the famine to wax sore in the land of Ur, insomuch that Haran my brother died, but before my father yet lived in the land of Ur of the Chaldees." Now, in the paper from Christopher Eames, it suggested that perhaps Haran was killed because of the idol worship, and the idol worship had caused the famine, and that dying before Terah meant in front of him. However, I believe that given the context here, it is simply saying that Haran died before his father, not in front of his father. However, we can't ignore the idea that perhaps this famine was brought on because of this idolatrous worship, or this worship of other gods. And this would be a legitimate reason for the people in Urkesh to reject Teru, but also a legitimate reason for the people of Ur to reject Terah, because he believed that the famine was being caused by him and his idol worship, insomuch that he repents, only to flee to Haran, the city-state, and then continue on in his idolatrous ways. This will conclude our first episode on this series where we analyze historical synchronisms. There are a few that we didn't get to in this episode. However, all these episodes will eventually be connected together for a more long-form version where we also include more of the details, such as even synchronisms with Hittite kings during this time. So thank you very much for watching. Please like, comment, share, and ask questions. Thank you very much.